Hey YouTube, this is Guy. Today on the review table, I am exceptionally lucky to have something really special. I was loaned a Breitling SuperOcean Steelfish reference A17390. I'm just super lucky to have been given this watch for review, and the person that lent it to me, if you happen to be watching this, thank you again very much. I really appreciate it. So yeah, basically what we're looking at here is a Breitling watch. My first experience with Breitlings, other than maybe seeing them in stores and of course online, I have not spent a lot of time with this particular watch, so you're not going to get my normal, average, really in-depth, super thorough review. I just don't have enough information or experience with this watch to give that kind of review, but I will give you my general impressions, tell you what I think about it, given the limited amount of time that I have spent with it. And what I can tell you right off the bat is this is a really nice, really high quality piece, a watch, whatever. I am super impressed with it. It's probably going to be a little bit on the large size for me, and we'll talk about all of the specs as far as the size and everything. Yeah, it's a big, hefty piece, no doubt about it. Now, a little very basic information about this watch before we jump into the specs. Of course, Breitling is a Swiss watchmaker. They were founded in 1884, and they're mostly known for watches geared towards diving and aviation. This particular watch, again, it's the SuperOcean Steelfish reference A17390, was introduced in 2006. At that time, this version was called the Steelfish X Plus, because it's the 44 millimeter version, and there was also a 42 millimeter Steelfish. It was produced up until 2012, and one thing that I found out, you can tell a difference between the earlier models versus the later models is if you look at the second hand. The later models have a arrow on the second hand at the very tip, like this one does. Earlier models may have had a square with a dot at the tip of the arrow hand. Now, there is still versions of the SuperOcean in Breitling's catalog, but they're not like this one. They're not like the Steelfish. If you look at the bezel, and if you're familiar with Breitling, you see that you have these little tabs at the 12, 15, 30, and 45 markers. Those are called rider tabs. The current generation of SuperOcean, or I think they're called SuperOcean 2, they don't feature that iconic Breitling rider tab style bezel. They have a more, I don't know if traditional is the right word, but common style bezel. It looks like it has some sort of insert. It's very, similar to maybe a Submariner or more or less any dive watch out there. However, there are models in Breitling's catalog that do still feature this style bezel. The Avenger line and the Colt line, I noticed, both still have this very iconic style Breitling bezel, which we'll get in and we'll look at it much closer. But I thought that was interesting that the current SuperOcean line doesn't have this this type of elapsed time bezel. That said, since this is no longer in production, of course, you're not going to find these anywhere other than on the used market. And I looked around a little bit. It seems like they kind of go for the maybe between $2,000 and $3,000 range, $2,500 thereabouts. Seems like if you're looking for a really high quality dive/tool watch, it's something to give some serious consideration to. I do think I prefer, though, the SuperOcean 2 42 millimeter. I'll try to roll in a picture of that so that you can see what it looks like in comparison to this SuperOcean Steelfish at 44 millimeter. I don't know, maybe it's more of like a contemporary design or something, but I think I do prefer the aesthetic of that newer generation SuperOcean 2 a little bit. But this is, again, a beautiful watch and super high quality from what I can tell. So let's jump into the specifications, I guess. Number one, What we are looking at in case diameter on this is again 44 millimeters. I believe I mentioned that. There was originally a 42 millimeter version as well, and then in the current line there is a 42 millimeter SuperOcean 2, of course, but 44 millimeter diameter from side to side, not including the crown. Thickness, it is a hefty watch. Comes in at about 16, maybe 16 and a half millimeters. My calipers are just cheap plastic caliper, and they're not digital, so it's hard to get a very accurate reading, but in that 16 millimeter ballpark in thickness. The lug width on this, that the bracelet, obviously, where it attaches, we're looking at 22 millimeters, so it's a good size bracelet in the upper range, I guess, for watch bracelets. Matter of fact, I don't think I've ever seen anything over a 22 millimeters, but I bet it's out there. Now here's the dimension that I find to be one of the most telling dimensions on how the watch is going to wear on the wrist. It's not really the diameter of the case, but the overall distance from the top to the bottom of the lugs, what I kind of like to call the wingspan. And on this watch, I measured out a 52 millimeter wingspan. So if we look at the side here, from the very top to the very bottom of the lugs. So we've got a fairly large case diameter, a fairly broad wingspan, which means it wears pretty big. Throw in the thickness, and it's got a heft to it. Unfortunately, I didn't throw it on my scale. I apologize for that, so I can't give you the weight, but I can tell you it is a very hefty watch. But size aside, which I can't really call it a negative, it's just for me a little bit too big. It actually does wear pretty nicely. I have a roughly 7-inch wrist, and I wore it for a few minutes. Hopefully my friend that loaned it to me won't mind that I wore it around my house a little bit. And, I feel like I could pull it off. It's not like unwearably large, but I'm used to smaller watches. 39 millimeters seems to be my sweet spot. So, it is what it is. Moving along, specifications. This does feature Breitling's Professional 2 bracelet with the slash cut links, I guess is what they call it. And we'll look at this bracelet in more detail up close in a little bit. But really a very nice bracelet. The Professional 1 version, I guess what I've learned, it didn't have these slash cut links. It had a more traditional, it's not an oyster style, it's a little different, but more squared off straight links. But yeah, that's the Professional 2 bracelet. The current versions I think have what they call the Professional 3, and I'm honestly not entirely certain what the difference is between the Professional 2 and Professional 3. At a glance, they kind of looked pretty similar. The crystal on this watch is a sapphire crystal with what I believe to be double anti-reflective coating, so on the top and the underside, and it's a really nice crystal. I've got a ton of light in here, so you're probably getting some reflection, like when I pan over towards that light. But it's funny, like without all of this direct studio lighting, when you look at this crystal, it is the clearest crystal I have ever seen in my life. When I showed the watch to my wife, she was like, "Oh my god, it doesn't even look like there's a piece of glass there." It is super clear. It's amazing. Honestly, I've never seen anything like it on any wristwatch before, including my Rolex Rolex Explorer, the 39 millimeter. Now, jumping onto the dial, it does have this extremely attractive blue dial. It has applied markers. The 6, 9, and 12 markers are not loomed, but the rest of the markers, as well as the handset, features some sort of luminescence material. I'm not sure exactly if it's a Breitling trade version or, some other third parties loom. I couldn't find that information out, unfortunately, in the short amount of time that I've had this watch. But the loom is pretty good, even though I am assuming this is quite a bit older. It still glows pretty well. On the dial, we have a date complication at the 3 o'clock position, of course. Again, we talked about the bezel briefly. It's a 120 click unidirectional elapsed time bezel. We do have a very nice screw-down crown with not overly prominent, but obviously crown guards. The watch features, let me zoom in on the dial so you can read it there with me, 2,000 meter water resist, 6,600 feet. Pretty significant water resistance on this guy. Let me turn the next page to my notes here real quick. This watch also features a helium escape valve on the side of the case there. And last but not least, it uses the Breitling caliber 17 movement. Now, I'll talk about that movement briefly. The Breitling caliber 17 is, as I understand it, based on the ETA 2824-2. It's built on a high-grade ETA EBOSH. It is highly customized, assembled, and tuned by Breitling. It's a 25 joule movement with a 42-hour power reserve. The beats or vibrations per hour run at 28,800. Of course, it's an automatic movement with bidirectional winding, and it does feature hand winding and hacking, of course, if you unscrew the crown. It is a COSC certified chronometer, so accuracy should be within a COSC range of no less than -4 seconds per day to no more than +6 seconds per day in accuracy. Basically, from what I understand, this is a very, very good movement, very highly customized again, very accurate. I mean, what little I have read about it leads me to believe that it is very well regarded, which, I mean, what I do know about, for example, just the base at a 2824-2 is it's nothing super special, but the amount of refinement and tuning that goes into it by Breitling really makes it, just a outstanding chronometer, I guess. But, that's basically all I can tell you about the movement. Again, I haven't had a lot of time to do a ton of research, but some basic information for you. Now, we're going to jump into kind of the meat and potatoes of my style of reviews, where I talk about the quality of the design, features, and functionality. First, we'll look at the case real quick. Again, we talked about the thickness of the case. It is, again, a beefy case. Let me get my little wipey here to get rid of some of my fingerprints. I know you guys don't want to look at that. Try to clean it up here real quick. The finish on the case is really well done. You have not super high polish on the sides, but it's like a, not like mirror polished, but it's a very nice, smooth, polished finish on the sides. The top sides of the case, the lugs, as well as the bracelet, has this very, very nice, very even, satiny brushed finish all throughout. Overall, the finishing on the case is excellent. Of course, this case is got a little bit of wear. I mean, if we look closely at it, there's a few little scratches here and there. It's obviously a well-worn and well-loved wristwatch. Nothing wrong with that, though. A lot of people enjoy their battle scars on their watches, as they put it. The case does, of course, feature not overly prominent crown guards, but very well done. I mean, all of the angles, all of the lines on this are just very nice, sweeping, soft lines. All of the edges are clean and crisp without being overly aggressive and sharp, which was one of my complaints about my Rolex Explorer. The edges on the case as well as on the bracelet were just too aggressive, I guess, for lack of a better term or way of describing it. This is not rounded or chamfered or dehorned per se, but it's very nice and very clean. Every edge is like deliberate but not overdone, I guess. Again, all of the lines are very sweeping and smooth. I think it gives a very, very almost elegant presentation to what is otherwise obviously a very rugged tool watch. We can look at the Caseback real quick. It's a very nice, not super decorated, but nice looking Caseback. You have the Breitling logo there in the center. Looks like, it's kind of a screw down Caseback. It's, I don't know, hexagon's obviously not the right word because it's got a lot more facets, but all along the edge here there's lines where I suppose you would need a special tool if you wanted to unscrew it. But beautiful engraving, Breitling logo there in the center. Nice, very nicely done. Unlike the Rolex Caseback, which is bare naked, this does feature some branding and engraving. But moving along, the crown itself, we talked about the crown guards on the case. The crown itself does feature the Breitling, not logo is probably the right word, but a signature, I guess would be. It is a screw down crown. The threading on the crown is very buttery smooth. It unscrews very, very easily. Pops right out there. When it's popped out into the first position, there's not any sort of wobble or play really. And then, of course, you can, from this position, hand wind your movement. The hand winding is just also buttery smooth. It feels more refined even than the Rolex hand winding in my experience, which is pretty surprising considering that there's a not insignificant price difference between the brands. But yeah, excellent, very, very nice action on the crown. Again, it is hacking, so we can pull the crown out, and it does stop the movement, second hand halts. We could go ahead and set our time here, but I'm not going to mess with that. And in the first position, which I skipped over there, you could quick set your date to whatever you want to. Screwing the crown back down is also easy. You just give it a little bit of pressure downward, screw it in. Again, extremely smooth, very, very, very nicely refined. The waterproofing system, I believe there's like, I don't want to misquote here. I want to say it was like triple sealed. I could be wrong. Maybe it's only double sealed as far as the gaskets within the crown to keep the waterproofness to that extreme 2,000 meter depth. Again, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say it was there's a significant amount of over-engineering, I guess. And it's probably not over-engineering if you're going to take this watch to those depths, but to ensure the waterproofness of the crown tube or stem tube there. So again, what little I know about it is pretty impressive. It's extremely high quality and well built. Next, we're going to talk about the bezel. And again, this bezel is that sort of iconic Breitling style bezel. It has no insert. All of the numerals on the bezel are engraved, and they're not even colored or filled in with anything. I think that is something that they do on some bezels, is fill in the hash marks and the numerals with color, some sort of coloration. But this one doesn't feature any of that. And then at the north, east, south, and west positions, you have these what they call the rider tabs. They do assist in gripping and turning the bezel. Since there's not really any significant amount of texturing or knurling or anything on the edge of the bezel. It's a little slick. The action of the bezel is stiff, and again, it's a 120 click bezel. It is a stiff action, but it's very positive, and there's no play whatsoever. In more budget line watches, of course, the Seikos, like we all love, of course, we all love the Seikos. They tend to have a little bit of a wiggle or play in the bezel. Nothing. This is just rock solid, but very stiff. So, you're not ever going to risk bumping it out of alignment, but perhaps operating it underwater could potentially pose a challenge. It is nice, though. It's very well done. Up at the 12 position, there's a little pip there, which is loomed along with the loom on the rest of the dial. Overall, this is probably going to be no small part of your decision-making process. Do you like the aesthetic of this Breitling style bezel, or do you like a more traditional bezel with some sort of colored insert? I do like a more traditional colored insert style bezel, which is why, again, I like that SuperOcean 2 in the more current line of Breitling watches. But, I don't dislike this one. It's just mild preference differences. You guys know what I mean. So again, we talked about the crystal, and I got to touch on that again. This is a sapphire crystal, and as I understand it, it is anti-reflective coating on the top and the underside. And it is so ridiculously crystal clear. I don't know how it's going to present on camera. I'm catching a little bit of my studio light. And as I move away, I mean, it's like there's no glass or crystal there at all. It's crazy how clear it is. Again, my wife looked at it and she was like, wow. I picked it up and I thought for a second that there was no, glass or crystal there at all. She was kind of surprised, and I have to say it is the clearest, cleanest crystal on any watch that I've ever seen. Now, I don't have a ridiculous amount of experience with all sorts of different types of higher end and luxury watches, but it's just super impressed with that aspect of this watch. It kind of reminded me of like that. You remember the first time you saw HD television? Maybe you don't. Maybe you're young enough where it's sort of been always high definition. But people from my generation or before are going to say like, yeah, when switching from standard definition broadcast to HD, it was like, wow, I couldn't believe how clear and sharp and crisp it looks. It's that same sensation when I got my hands on this watch and saw this crystal. Just ridiculous how nice and clear it is. So if you're the type of person that doesn't like a lot of reflection and wants a very, very legible wristwatch, I mean, you can't go wrong with this. I can promise you that. Now, the next thing to talk about is the dial, the handset, everything going on in the face of this watch. It is absolutely beautiful. It is, again, the blue dial. We have applied markers all throughout. The 6, 9, and 12. I'm not sure if those are stainless steel or if they're a precious metal like white gold. I couldn't find that information. On the other markers, the 5, 10, 20, 25, 35, so on, those are outlined in, again, a metal, but they are loomed. The 6, 9, and 12 have no loom on them, so keep that in mind. The handset, including the second hand arrow tip, also all have loom on them, and the loom is good. It's like a green kind of Seiko-esque loom. But I'm not sure, like, is it brighter than a Seiko Monster? How does it compare to the Rolex? I mean, favorably, I suppose. Probably not quite as bright or as long lasting. At least that initial burst. I haven't spent, again, all sorts of time with this in low light situations, but when you give a watch a burst of light from a flashlight or whatever, it just glows, like radioactive for a few minutes. This glows like radioactive for a few minutes, like all the other watches that I have experience with. So I can tell you, at least from that perspective, it seems to be just about as adequate as any other loom that I have experience with. But the longevity, I don't know, is it going to be glowing 8 hours from now, 12 hours from now? I can't confirm that for you, unfortunately. Now, the Breitling logo is just under the 12 with Breitling branding and the date 1884. On the south side of the dial, of course, it says SuperOcean. Certified chronometer, I suppose that is, in some language there. And there's one little hint of red on the dial there, automatic, as well as the hint of red on the second hand. That's a nice little touch. Just adds a little something. And then, of course, the fourth line there, 2,000 meters / 6,600 feet. Now, we also have a military time scale, sort of an inner ring here, 13, 14, 15, and so on, all the way around. So if you ever need to tell time in the 24-hour mode, you can look down real quick and see that, at least I guess in this case, what are we looking at? 1355-ish. So, we got that there. There is an outer chapter ring, sort of like a train track style chapter ring, with little enhanced pips at each of the main minute marks. And then there's this rehaut around the outside. features the 5, 10, 20, 25, and so on and so forth throughout around the dial. That's a nice feature in that it kind of sets the dial down deeper into the case and gives it just a nice dished out level of depth, added dimension, which is something that I like. Overall, the layout of this dial is really, really nice. As a matter of fact, I had mentioned that I prefer the newer version SuperOcean 2. However, the dial layout on this one is actually nicer. The SuperOcean 2, the 42mm one that I think I kind of like the best, it has a full Arabic scale, 5, 10, 15, 20, or is it 1, 2, 3, 4? I forget now. Oh yeah, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way up to 12. It's not the 5, 10, 15, 20. But regardless, I like how this one just has the 6, 9, and 12, and then the applied circles at all of the other markers. I think that it's kind of a more classy or elegant design. It's less crowded. That is probably the big difference between those two watches, and this one I think is sort of more of a home run. Now the newer version, SuperOcean 2, does have versions with square markers as opposed to round markers, and a full Arabic scale of numerals. I don't really like square markers though. I'm more of a round marker kind of guy. So yeah, the dial layout on this particular version is absolutely fantastic in my opinion. It's kind of like that Rolex Explorer vibe. Of course, the Explorer has the 3, 6, and 9 with the triangle up at the 12, as opposed to the 6, 9, and 12 with the date over at the 3. But it has that same kind of vibe for me, and I like that quite a bit. What else is there to talk about? I guess this bracelet's probably the last thing to talk about. It is a really nice looking bracelet. Again, it's their Breitling Professional 2, I believe is what it's called. It features their slash cut links. It is different. I mean, I'm not used to a bracelet that has this style of link with this sort of diagonal pattern, but it is quite nice, and it does seem to be very comfortable. It features, let's see, we can find them, screws, of course. It's not push pins or any sort of wonky system. Very, very robust. Of course, we have solid end links. I don't know if we can get in there and see very well or not, which you would expect at a watch at this sort of price point. And the clasp it's not bad. Of course, my buddy's clasp here has attracted quite a few marks and scratches. But what we have is a fold-over safety clasp. No push buttons, which is kind of a downfall. No actuating hinge or anything like the Rolex Explorer had. It's just a friction style clasp. The swing arm, or the little elbow folding portion, very nicely done. Breitling's branding is on it. It's not cheap stamped material. This is really, really high quality steel. And then, of course, you have the main clasp. That's not the highest quality clasp. It's not, again, cheap stamped metal. It does have some robustness to it, but it's just a step above the types of clasps that you find on your more budget, affordable watches. It's maybe the weak point of this entire package, but it's not bad. It's not awful. It's not an issue. You do have 4 micro adjustment holes on the clasp, so if you need to fine tune the fit, you have several options there for positioning. One of my big complaints about a lot of watches is they might only give you 2 holes or 3 if you're lucky. I like at least 4, even 5 would be a welcome addition for me. But overall, that's probably the weakest point of this watch, if there is any weak points. But it's not a super big negative. I mean, you even go back and look at some of the older Rolex bracelets, in particular the clasps. I mean, they're not super outstanding. So overall, it's like instead of an A, it's a B, right? It's just not quite what I would hope for, but maybe the more modern versions, in particular, like I said, there's the Professional 3 version that looks very similar to this on in pictures. Maybe they have made some improvements at that point. Well, guys, that's basically everything I can give you as far as my experience with this watch so far. I do really like it quite a bit. I guess I can do a wrist shot. I know guys like that. Give me a second and I'll throw it on the wrist for you. Alright, so there it is on my wrist. It's a little snug. The gentleman that loaned it to me has a slightly smaller wrist than me. I was able to take it out with those micro adjustments to the loosest position. And I mean, I can't really fit my finger under there, but it's on. It's not horribly uncomfortable, although, like I said, it is slightly tight. But there it is on my 7-inch wrist. I think it looks pretty decent. I know a lot of people like to wear their watches further back. I like mine more towards my hand, right there on my wrist. That's just the way I do it. I don't think there's any right way or wrong way. It's just user preference. But very, very nice. Again, it's big, but I don't think it's too big for me. Thickness, if I can kind of get that angle there. It stands up high. Again, 16-ish millimeters thick, if I remember correctly. But I think it actually looks pretty good. I wouldn't hesitate to wear a watch like this. I'm not sure if I would purchase for myself a watch quite this large. But if my friend that loaned it to me decides that he wants to let me keep it, I would graciously accept the offer. But there you go, guys. There it is on my wrist. And again, it's a pretty nice piece. Unfortunately, I didn't have it long enough to give you like my overall impressions after having it for weeks or months. But what I can tell you based on my initial impressions is very, very nice. It's, more than I was expecting, I suppose, if I'm being honest. I don't know what I was expecting exactly, but I've been pretty impressed with just about everything. Again, minor complaints about that clasp on the bracelet, but nothing to complain too egregiously about. Alright guys, well, I'm going to wrap this up. I appreciate you tuning in and checking the watch out with me, and again, I appreciate the person that loaned it to me very, very much. Again, thank you. Can't thank you enough. Sign off for now. I'll be back, I don't know, later this week or early next week with another review video. Bye now.